Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Graduate Housing Webinar. We're happy to welcome you to Mcmaster. I know many of you are starting your program in January 2022, and this is your first webinar with Mcmaster, and we're happy to welcome you. Today, I am joined by Andrew Stables, our International Student Success Coach. Andrew will present this presentation about finding off-campus housing for graduate students in Hamilton. But before we get started, there are just some housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. And if you see a question that someone else posted that you would like to see answered as well, please use the thumbs up function on the Q&A section. This will help bring that question forward. So when more students are interested in one question, we're able to see the questions on top, and it will be given priority when we get into the Q&A section. And of course, we'll address the as many questions that we can address at the end of the presentation during the Q&A period. Next slide, please. Before we get into the housing webinar, I would like to acknowledge that McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. This is a land acknowledgement that the university typically recognize at the beginning of every presentation, because we do want to acknowledge that it is the land that McMaster sits on that brought us together and eventually, hopefully, will bring us physically together, especially for a webinar like this where we talk about moving to Hamilton and settling in Hamilton. It is important to recognize that the land that we sit on and the traditional people that it belongs to. Without further ado, I would like to pass the virtual mic to my colleague, Andrew Stables.
Great, thanks very much, Yufei. And again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. To sort of start off today, I wanted to just review some of the terminology that maybe we're going to talk about in this presentation, or maybe you're going to encounter while you're searching for housing. So some of these you might be familiar with, some might be new and more of a local term. Rent, so that's going to be the regular payment that you pay typically each month, often at the beginning of each month, that you would be using to pay to rent your apartment or house. Utilities, this is a term that we would use to refer to electricity, water, waste disposal, maybe gas for heating, and sewage. So utilities are typically grouped into one category. And so some places might include utilities. Some places you might have to pay the utility fees on top of your rent. Furnished versus unfurnished. A furnished apartment is somewhere that might have a bed and a desk, maybe a table, that kind of thing already available to you. Unfurnished means that it would not be included in the rent, and you would be responsible to sort of arrange to get the required furniture. You might see a posting that says co-ed. Co-ed means that it would be more than one gender that's living in the same accommodation. A sublet, this is something that for people who are arriving now in January might be quite common to see. So a sublet is when you're taking over a lease that a tenant has already signed. So in Canada, it's typical for people to sign a 12-month lease. And for students, often those leases are from September till August, or from May until April. Not always, but typically that is what the sort of rental agreements are. And so given that you're going to be arriving, in the coming months and might be outside of that typical window, you might be encountering what we would call subleases, which might be, you sort of taking over the remaining part of that agreement. A lease, this would be the contract that you are signing between you and either the landlord or a rental property. A lease is a legal binding document. So if you do sign a lease, you are now committed to that. Whether you move in or not, you have committed that you are going to pay the rent and any other additional costs for the duration of the lease. In Ontario, there is something called an Ontario standard lease. You're able to Google what that looks like. All landlords are supposed to use an Ontario standard lease, and that is what we would recommend you to look for. However, we do recognize that some landlords still do not use an Ontario standard lease, but it is what landlords should be using. Within the lease, it would give you details like, are utilities included? Are they not? Are there any deposits that are required? Are you able to leave the lease early? And sort of all of your legal rights as a tenant. And then the last thing would be insurance. So sometimes students opt to purchase insurance on top of their rent. And so insurance wouldn't be from your landlord. It would be something that you get from a third party. And insurance would cover you, depending on what kind of insurance you get, for any property damage that might occur. And so when I say property, it doesn't necessarily mean the house or the apartment, because obviously the landlord would have their own insurance for that. But if something happened and some of your personal property got damaged, you can actually buy insurance in order to protect your own personal property. So that's just sort of some of the terms that I wanted to get out of the way first. And so what we're going to do today is sort of talk about sort of the varying different aspects that you'll encounter when looking for a house. You'll want to discuss or think about who you want to live with, the types of different housing that's available in Canada, because we do recognize that housing in Canada might be different from the housing you're familiar with. Talking a little bit about what your budget is and what to sort of expect when you're looking for houses, the different locations within the city. We're going to talk about how to actually facilitate the search. And then we're also going to talk a little bit just to make sure that you are safe through this process. Okay, so the first question you really should be asking yourself is, who do you want to live with? Some of you might want to live by yourself. Some of you might be coming with a spouse or partner. Maybe you have family that you're coming with. Some of you might be looking to rent with other classmates, or some of you might just be looking to meet other people and having roommates. And so during this process, you really want to try to establish what kind of roommates you would be living with. So a good discussion point would be, what are your interests? What are your what's your schedule going to be like? If you're more of a quiet person, you're probably not going to be a good fit in a house that is full of students that want to party and stay up really late. Similarly, you want to have sort of the discussion on cleanliness. If you maybe aren't so concerned about being tidy and it's okay to leave dishes in the sink for a little while, but your roommates really want things to be super clean, again, that might be an area of conflict. So it's important to sort of think of these things before you sign a lease. And so if you have the opportunity to communicate with the people you're going to live with first, I would just really encourage you to have these very candid personal conversations, just so you understand what the environment's going to be like that you're moving into. You'd also want to talk about things like shared costs. So, if you're living in a house with multiple people, do you need to have your own internet, or are you going to share the price and split the bills for the internet? What about other household responsibilities, like who's going to take out the garbage every week and those kind of things? So it is good to sort of have those conversations before you move in. Given that you are all probably very new to Canada, maybe it's your first time, maybe you don't know anybody in Hamilton, there is a program through Mcmaster called Mcmatch. And this is a great way for you to connect with other individuals, other students who are looking for off-campus housing. So you can, if you go to the link just sort of on the bottom of the screen, offcampus.mcmaster.ca, /slash Mcmatch. You can fill out a profile, and then it will allow you to search and connect with other students that might be looking for housing. And again, this is a nice way to sort of establish that you're going to be living with people that you'd be compatible with. Next, we're going to talk about the different types of student housing. And so Mcmaster is located in a fairly residential area. I wouldn't use the word urban because it's not necessarily like a downtown, but it is, there's lots of family homes and houses in the area. And so because of that, probably the most common living environment would be what we would call a student house. And so a student house, as you can sort of see from the picture on the screen, would be like a typical family home that has now probably doesn't have a family in it and is now just split between students. And so you're going to have a private bedroom. Most likely it won't be furnished. You might have a common space like a living room that you could share with your other housemates. And then they would all have a kitchen, might have 1 or 2 bathrooms that would be shared. And these kinds of houses, you know, it could be anywhere between 4 others up to 7 or 8 other students, depending on the size of the house. Generally, this type of house is less expensive. So if you are looking for a more economical housing arrangement, that this might be the route to go. The properties surrounding Mcmaster are older, but older doesn't necessarily mean that they're you know, bad or unsafe or unclean houses. It's just the surrounding area was built around Mcmaster about 80 years ago, and so most of the houses reflect that. And so typically you'd be signing an 8 or 12-month lease, but again, as students coming in sort of at a different time, not sort of that September where we have most students arriving. You might be looking at signing more of like a 4-month lease or an 8-month lease to take over a sublet from another student. So inside of a house, there's sort of 3 different types of rooms that you could have. So a basement room is quite common in Canada. Typically a basement, you're still going to have a window, but as you can see from the picture, the window is usually going to be quite small. And so if you're somebody that, you know, really needs to have access to daylight and looking outside, a basement option might not be the most appropriate for you. There will be bedrooms either on the first floor, second floor, or third floor. Again, you're going to have larger windows, so a bit more light. And then some might even have sort of an attic space up on the top floor of the house that you could rent. Basements are generally going to be a little bit cooler in the winter, but they're also a little bit cooler in the summer, which is an advantage because it does get quite hot here. Attics are generally going to be probably cooler in the winter because the heating might not be, the forced air might not be strong enough to get up to the attic. And attics can also be really, really hot in the summertime. The next type of housing is probably more of a traditional style apartment. And so this could be something like a high rise, like you see in the picture, or we do also have a lot of what I would call low rises, which might be, 3 or 4 stories tall. With an apartment, it's generally going to be a single or a double occupancy. So could be a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom. There are 3 bedroom apartments available as well, but I would say they're going to be a bit harder to come by. With an apartment, you would have your own private bedroom. You would share the bathroom with the other person in your apartment if you are living with someone. But if you have your own apartment, everything in this space would be yours. So it'd be your personal bathroom, your kitchen, living space, all of that. With apartments, these aren't necessarily going to be catered for students. So in a lot of the apartment buildings surrounding the area, there's lots of families or professionals that live in them. So the sort of that typical lease period that I was mentioning of a student of sort of the September to August wouldn't really apply in this situation. So you will find apartments that have leases starting throughout the year. And generally, these are going to be 12-month leases. Now, apartments are not going to be furnished, so you would be responsible for arranging to get any furnishing that you would need. The next option is still it's off campus. It's still sort of a private student. It's still an apartment, but it would only be geared towards students. And so again, these are going to be single or double occupancy. But because they are geared towards students, the one nice thing about them is that they are furnished. So you would have a bed in your bedroom. You would have like a desk to study at. If there's a shared common space, it'll have a couch. Some even have TVs. However, they are going to be a bit more costly because you are sort of paying a premium for that. They do often have roommate matching services. So if you were looking to apply to a sort of a private student rental and you don't know anybody, within the community, they would have the opportunity for you to get matched with sort of a compatible roommate or group of students that you'd be living with. They're going to be 12-month leases. And in the lease, it's going to include everything. So you are sort of paying that premium because you don't have to worry about any additional costs. The other type that I would say might be the least common, but it's still a viable option for students would be renting a bedroom in a landlord's house. And so this could be sort of in 2 formats. One could be that you just have your own bedroom in a house and that you're sharing everything else with that family you're living with. So that could be, you're sharing a kitchen, a living space with the owner or the family. It could also be that the owner is just in 1 bedroom and then all the other bedrooms have other students, but the landlord and the owner is still there. These places generally might be furnished as opposed to a student house. They can be, again, more expensive because it is furnished, but there might be a little bit more flexibility in the length of the lease. So again, there's lots of different options for you to be aware of. And so we just wanted to make sure you know what sort of the differences are between these types. So obviously, the rent price is a major factor when you're looking for rental properties. And this is sort of an average breakdown of what you could expect at Hamilton right now. So as you can see, a student house, most economical. But again, you would be living and sharing the space with more individuals. Apartments really vary depending on the location of the apartment as well as the size. So a one-bedroom apartment could be anywhere between 1,200 and 2,000 per month. And then you would typically be paying electricity on top of that. The private student residence, again, probably on the higher end, between 820 and 1,200. And a room in a landlord's house is sort of, it's not going to be as cheap as a room in a student house, but it would be cheaper than the other options. So when we're also thinking about budget, it is important to not just focus on your rent, because obviously rent is only one part of your monthly living expenses. And so I wanted to just provide a little bit of a snapshot of what expenses might be like when you arrive. It's obviously going to depend on your lifestyle. Food is a huge expense. Are you going to eat out a lot, cook for yourself? But this is sort of an average of what you might be able to expect to pay per month. So eating out, again, this would just be once a week at a restaurant that's sort of on the cheaper side, looking at maybe $60 a month. It is important to know that in Canada, when you are going out to eat in a restaurant, you're also expected to tip. So that's usually another like 15% on top of your bill. So, if right now you're looking at different restaurants and trying to just gauge what prices are like, you're going to generally be paying tax on top of that, on top of the price, which is 13%, and then tip on top of that, which is 15%. So the bill that or the dollar amount that you see on the menu, you're really going to be adding like another 30% on top of that. Groceries, again, depending on your diet, but you could average maybe around $400 a month. Utility bills, this would depend again on sort of how you're living. So if you're living in a student house, per month it might be $140, but that might be split amongst 5 or 6 people. So the cost to you might not be that high. Internet has quite a wide range in Canada. And again, depending on who you're living with, some of that cost might be split. I think phone bills are probably the most surprising to students. You could get the cheapest, which would be very, very little data. You'd be looking at around $40 a month. They can get as high as $200 a month. You certainly don't need to spend $200 a month to have a good phone plan. But again, this is just important for you to sort of think about as you're budgeting. And so probably an important thing to think about, other than the type of house, is also where you want to live. And so what you want to think about is how often are you going to be coming to campus? If you have to be on campus once a week, then the proximity to campus might not be your #1 priority. If you need to be on campus all the time, you might want to be within walking distance or at least on a major bus route, so it is easy for you to get to campus. It is important to note that most full-time students would have what we call the HSR, the Hamilton Street Railway, which is our transit system. That is something that's included in your tuition. So you wouldn't necessarily be paying any additional fees to take transit within Hamilton to get to campus. But you do want to make sure that you are close to a major bus route that would get you directly to Mcmaster. Mcmaster is sort of a kind of a transit hub, so a lot of the buses do go directly to campus, but again, you may have to transfer depending on where you're living. So in terms of the areas, where most students live is an area called Westdale and Ainsleywood. And if you can sort of see, Mcmaster's kind of sort of that blue dot in the middle here that's kind of grayed out, sort of just above the subway. That's where the campus is located. And so a lot of the student houses, some of the high-rise apartments and low-rise apartments would be located in this area. A lot of it would be walkable to campus. If you can't walk, you could just hop on a bus and it'll be very, very quick to get to campus. Some students do opt to live in downtown Hamilton. Again, it's another great option for you, but you just want to be aware that it would be probably too far to walk to campus. You'd be looking at like maybe a 60 to 70-minute walk. So you'd probably be taking the bus. And so you just want to make sure that you're on either close to one of the bus routes, which would be through King Street or Main Street. So Hamilton sort of has two streets that kind of go east to west that are on the main bus routes. And what I would suggest is when you're searching for houses, go onto Google Maps, put in the house address, and then put in the Mcmaster address, and just put the transit option, and it will tell you approximately how long it takes for you to get to campus. Another alternative, which is an area called Dundas. This is west of Mcmaster. It's sort of a quieter part of the city, might be a little bit more expensive, but it is, you could bike to campus or again, take transit to campus. So in terms of how to begin your search, there are different resources that are available to you. And so we'll kind of go through what those are and what the benefits of each are. So the first would be to use the Mcmaster off-campus housing website. And the nice thing about this is that all of the properties listed here are going to be people specifically looking for students, whereas the other ones that I'm going to be mentioning, are open to anybody. They're not necessarily just for students. And so generally, a lot of the ones listed on the off-campus housing website through Mcmaster are going to be fairly close to campus. You're not going to find ones that are an hour and a half bus ride away or anything like that. And they are going to be probably priced more for a student budget. And so on the next slide, I know it's a little fuzzy, but this is kind of a video walkthrough. So when you go to the website, you are able to search by different property type. You can filter by rent, how many bathrooms, those kind of things. So there are lots of features that you can use to filter through your search. The other options would be non-official Mcmaster options. So again, there would be, more, I don't want to use the word risk, but these are open for anyone to post anything. So they might not necessarily be specifically looking for students. However, one that is run by a group of students is called the Mcmaster Off-Campus Housing Post Board. That this is through Facebook. And this is where either landlords or other students might be posting their house availability, especially through the Mcmaster off-campus student housing one. You might be able to find some of those subleases because sometimes a student will sign a 12-month lease, and then they have a co-op that they need to go to on January, and their co-op is in Toronto or in a different city, and they no longer are able to live there. And so they're looking for somebody to take over that lease. So again, through the Mcmaster Housing Post Board, you can just kind of scroll through the web page. There are often going to be pictures. As I said, sometimes it is students that are posting this. And so you would be able to have that conversation with students about, what kind of house is it? Are you studious? Are you partying? What's your guest policy? And those kind of questions. The other one through Facebook is Marketplace. And so Marketplace is it's a great resource to find anything. So if you're looking for bed, desks, furniture, that kind of stuff, you can use Marketplace, but you can also use it to search for housing. And so through the website, there is an option that you can select called property rentals. And you would just want to make sure that you are searching in the Hamilton area because it might default to somewhere else. And again, because you would be searching all of Hamilton, not necessarily student specific, it is really important that you double check, where exactly is this house in Hamilton? Is it a one bus route? Are there bus routes to get to campus? So I think when you start looking at more of the general population websites, it is going to be really important that you double check the proximity to campus. Other websites that are popular, there's one called Kijiji, which is kind of a funny word, but it's a really popular sort of marketplace website. Again, you can buy just about anything on Kijiji, but they do have rentals. So Kijiji is Kijiji. And you would just, again, want to be putting in the location of Hamilton and be double checking the proximity to campus. Other ones, rentals.com, rentseeker.ca. A lot of landlords will cross-post between the different locations, but there are different platforms that you can use to search for housing. Now, we recognize that when you're searching for housing from abroad, it can be quite overwhelming, quite stressful. Signing a lease without actually even seeing the property. And so I do know some students opt to come to Canada earlier before their classes start and, maybe stay in a hotel for a week or an Airbnb. And during that time, going around and actually viewing the properties. So if that is something that you're looking to do, the Tourism Hamilton, which is the city's tourism website, has a great list of resources, for bed and breakfast, for hotels or those kind of places, if you do need temporary housing prior to securing your final housing. Again, with temporary housing, it is going to be an added expense. But for some people that they do, or they would prefer seeing the house in person prior to signing that lease. We're also recognized that depending on your vaccination status, you may need to quarantine when you arrive. So when you do arrive in Canada, unless you have a Health Canada approved vaccine, you would be required to quarantine for 14 days. And so it is important just to make sure that the house that you've arranged in Hamilton meets the quarantine requirements. So I know this website's a little bit long to write down. I don't know, Yufei, maybe you can put it in the chat. But this is a great quarantine assessment tool that the government has that it just answers or asks you some questions, and you could see if the house that you're going to live in would meet the quarantine requirements. If it doesn't, then you'd be looking at arranging some kind of temporary housing for those 14 days because it is required that you follow the quarantine guidelines. Now, obviously, if you are in quarantine, that means you cannot leave. You have to stay in your sort of self-isolated in your place of quarantine. And so if you do need to arrange a place to quarantine, I would suggest looking for something that has access to a kitchen or a fridge or a microwave, something like that, just to help reduce the cost of food. Because as you could sort of see in the budget, food in Canada and takeout and delivery really is very expensive. But if you have access to a kitchen, you could always arrange for a grocery store to deliver actual groceries or even things like some fruit and bread and just simple things that you could prepare simple meals, so you're not having to pay so much every meal time to get food delivered to you. Obviously, the most important thing is to make sure that you are safe throughout your time at Mcmaster. And so we do just want to mention about that there are unfortunately some people that use platforms to try to scam individuals, and this sometimes happens with rent, so that there are some things that you can look out for during your search to make sure that you are protected against sort of these scams and these fraudulent postings. So if you see a posting that maybe doesn't have any pictures, or the pictures are like stock photos, or just it just doesn't look legitimate, it's probably not going to be a legitimate place. If there's something that is posting that the rent is really, really, really cheap and pictures are super luxurious, like you're living like royalty and you're only paying $200 a month, probably not real, right? If it's too good to be true, it's probably because it's not true. Another thing to be wary of is people requesting money up front. So sometimes you might need to pay a deposit, which is typically your last month's rent. That's a fairly common practice. But if they're asking for like a $5,000 security deposit, or even like $1,000 security deposit, something like that, and it is not from a legitimate like property management company, they're probably just trying to get your money, and then the ad will disappear and you'll never hear from them again. If you're communicating with the landlord and you're asking different questions, and they're just not being very transparent, and it always just comes down to, provide me money and I'll answer your questions, or things like that. Again, probably somebody trying to scam you. And it's always best just to use your own personal intuition. If you just have a funny feeling about how your interaction with somebody is going, use that gut feeling and just try to find something else. I'm not trying to scare you saying every posting is a scam, because most postings are not scams. But it is just important to realize that there are unfortunately people that do this, do try to scam individuals. And so we just want to make sure that you're not falling victim to that. Once you have found a place, you like it, it's good, the rent's okay, maybe you've signed the lease, and you've arrived in Hamilton and you're ready to move in. The process to do this is typically you would meet with your landlord to receive the keys. And I would always recommend that you do a walkthrough with your landlord. The reason for that is, the pictures they posted might have been taken before the previous tenant was there. And if the previous tenant made any damage or anything like that, like, scratches on a wall, or like a door is not closing properly, or those kind of things, it's always good to make note of any of that damage ahead of time with your landlord. So when you move out, you're not being blamed for damage that was already there. It's also really important to ask your landlord just sort of about the daily livings in that place. So disposing of garbage. In Hamilton, garbage pickup usually occurs once per week. If you're around Mcmaster, that's generally on a Monday, but if you're in different parts of the city, it would be different days. It's just so you know sort of what are the rules and regulations to dispose of garbage, that there's usually bag restrictions. Where do you put recycling? Who's responsible for yard maintenance? So with a lot of you, you're probably going to be arriving in snow season in Canada. And so sometimes if you're staying in a student house, the people who are living there might be responsible for shoveling the snow and clearing the sidewalks. So you just want to make sure that you're aware of what your responsibilities are. Understand how to use the appliances before you start using them. And also just about mail delivery, if a package is being sent to you, how are you to receive it? Typically, you do have to buy your own sheets, beddings, towels, and pillows, and those kind of things. Even if it is furnished, generally you need to bring your own bedding. So just sort of keep that in mind. Once you've moved in, it is important just to keep, these simple steps to ensure your own safety. When you're in the house, and especially when you leave, you just always want to make sure the doors are locked and windows are locked as well. You never want to let anybody into your house that you don't know. This would include, somebody claiming like, oh, I'm here to inspect the water heater, or I'm here to, check on your plumbing or anything like that. Don't let anyone into your house unless your landlord has sort of pre-arranged or let you know that someone would be coming. It's important to ensure that your house has working smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. Those are required. So again, when you're walking around with your landlord, that would just be something to double check, make sure that they are working. Just general safety, student houses, as I mentioned, they could be quite old, that they are safe electrically, but you don't want to be putting like 4 extension bars and all of these extension plugs and all of your gadgets and charging devices and hair dryers and all of that all into one outlet, because that could be a hazard. Also, just be aware, of signs of bed bugs or other pests or critters when you are sort of, looking through your property. If for some reason, and I hope you never ever have to use these services, but if for some reason something happens, you have a dispute with a landlord, maybe you show up and they say the house was furnished and you're paying that premium for a furnished house, but the landlord doesn't have it furnished, and there's some kind of a challenge. You do have access to get legal help. So there's a group in downtown Hamilton called the Hamilton Legal Clinic, and they actually do have people that specialize specifically in landlord and tenancy disputes. So again, if you'd need that support, you could get it through them. The Ontario website also has really, really great resources, specifically about property management, COVID-19 restrictions, and those kind of things. And of course, if you ever have any questions, you can always reach out to our office, which is the International Student Services, and we're happy to help you. So our email address is iss@mcmaster.ca. So I know that's a lot of information to digest. It is being recorded, so if you need to ever go back and rewatch anything, you're welcome to. But we would like to just take the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have, and we'll do our best to provide those answers. Yufei, were there any questions that came in?
Yes, thank you, Andrew, for the very informative presentation. We do have a few questions in the Q&A period, and I encourage everyone to direct their questions there. So the first question that we have is, let's just dive right into it, is about furnished and unfurnished units. So the student asked, does a refrigerator come under furnished or unfurnished? So I feel like we can include like a stove or things like kitchen utilities in this question as well.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I would say every apartment, every house, every place that you're going to live in will include a refrigerator, a freezer, and a stove, oven. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about furnished, but those would be things that are just standard everywhere. So when we're talking about furnished, it would be more, are dishes included, or a kettle, or Microwave might be included depending on where, but it would be those sort of smaller appliance items, or as I said, that like a chair, desk, bed. But yeah, stove, refrigerator will be included for sure.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. And so the next question, we got two of both, and is from a student in Germany. And
Mm.
there are two incoming MBA exchange students. So as you know, our MBA campus is a little further away from our main campus. And these students are considering moving to Toronto. So as a general question, is there something that we think as being perhaps too far from the university, or the general distance in terms of where the students live? And in these student situations, if they only have to be on campus a day or two every week, what's kind of the general commuting for per se situation?
Yeah, that's so if you're asking specifically for Toronto, I would say Toronto prices might be a little bit higher. So that's just one thing to be aware of. Um, Commuting from Toronto to the Ron Joyce School of Business, which is in Burlington, you would have to take a train and then a bus or an Uber. I'm not sure if there's public transit that goes directly to it. Do you know Yufei?
I'm not aware of any. I know that there are shuttles between campuses, so Masters main campus and the Royal Joy Center, but I don't know. I don't believe there's public transit. You may have to take something from the train station.
Yeah, so again, it is a personal choice and depends on your financial situation and what you want to experience. You certainly could take a train to the closest train station in Burlington and then take an Uber to campus, but there would be, a significant added expense doing that, especially if you're doing that regularly. Um, yeah, again, I can't say because it is your personal preference, but it would not be very convenient, I don't think, to get from Toronto to that campus.
Perfect. And so while we're on the topic of commuting, a student is asking regarding winter season and the commute to McMaster. Is there something we should look out for just in terms of commuting in general?
Oh, yeah, so we'll start with walking, maybe walking, biking. It's cold, so you'll definitely want to dress for it. I think generally what we encourage students to do is wear lots of layers because your house is going to be warm, your class, your university is going to be warm, but everything in between might be a little cold. So um, if you're walking or biking to campus, it's certainly doable in the winter. Um, most people do shovel their snow and so you can get to campus. Get a good sturdy pair of boots if you are going to be spending a lot of time walking. If you're taking a bus, buses generally drive through everything regardless of the weather. But again, you have to factor in waiting for the bus outside in the cold. So it really does come to dressing. If you are driving yourself, winter driving can be tricky if it's something you've never done. So I mean, lots of people do still drive and commute in the winter time, but I think generally you'd be looking to add more time to your commute when we have a snowstorm or an ice storm. Um, so, depending on how close you are to campus, it might be catching an earlier bus just to ensure you get to class on time.
Thank you, Andrew. And speaking of driving, I have a question about parking.
Mm.
So what are the parking situation like if you live in a house, and what is it like on campus?
Sure. So if you live in a student house, there might be street parking available depending on where you are, or there might be a driveway in which you could park. But that would be a good conversation to have with the landlord as well as your other potential roommates because If you're the only one with a car, then it's probably okay to park in the driveway. But if everybody else has a car and the driveway is not going to be big enough for 5 individuals. Very close to campus, there are a lot of street parking restrictions because they don't want students to be parking on the road and taking away from like the residents parking. But you can apply, I guess, through the city to have like a more longer term street parking pass if you are in one of those restricted areas. If you're in an apartment, I don't want to say they all have parking spots, but I think a lot of the high rises that there probably would be one parking space available, or you might have to pay an additional rent for that parking space. And then when it comes to parking on campus, there is parking available, but it is really expensive. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I just shared the parking on campus website in the chat, so you can kind of look at the prices and the locations of campus parking. In short, very general, you're probably not looking, you probably won't be able to park right in front of your building. So as you know, our campus kind of spread pretty widely. So, and it is, like Andrew said, a bit costly to park on campus. So Andrew, I'll give you a break. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, so I was just gonna say if you drive to campus and park, sometimes you might be parking and then hopping on a shuttle to actually get to your class because the parking lots can be quite far away.
Yes. So Andrew, I'll give you a 30-second break and I'll take care of the next question. So the next question is about staying at the Mcmaster's residence or dormitory. Unfortunately, the Mcmaster University residence buildings are only reserved for first-year undergraduate students. So any upper year students or graduate students are not eligible to stay on campus residence. We do have very limited space. And I know that even for the first-year undergraduate students, there is a long wait list. So unfortunately, graduate students are not eligible for on-campus residence. Okay, and Andrew, we're back with more transportation related questions. This question might kind of be a bit of a, we don't know the student, but they're asking if they're able to carry their luggage of at least 46 kilograms using the GO transport. And without knowing the student, what would you say?
So I hope your luggage has wheels. 46 kilos is really quite heavy. So for Go Transit, if you're thinking of coming from the, so for those of you who don't know, so Go Transit is like an intercity bus system in Ontario. So if you want to go from the airport to Hamilton or from Hamilton to Toronto, you'd be taking what's called Go Transit. And so Go Transit generally has storage underneath the bus, or there will be space on the bus that you could bring your luggage. I would say if you can lift it and carry it, there won't be an issue going on the bus. Yeah, but you'll have to have some significant muscles to lift a 46 kilo luggage.
Yeah, and another question about commuting. How do you feel about commuting from London, Ontario? That is much further than Toronto.
Yeah, so between Hamilton and Toronto, there is decent public transit. Between London, Ontario, and Hamilton, there really isn't viable public transit. You'd be looking on a good day, probably an hour and 15 minutes, maybe more, one way. In the wintertime, where London's located and Hamilton's located, the weather patterns can be a little bit different. So we could have a really bad snowstorm in Hamilton and London be okay, or London could have a really bad snowstorm and Hamilton be okay. And the drive could be really, really challenging. Again, it's a personal choice, but if you're factoring in, let's say, 3 to 4 hours of drive time every time you need to come to campus, that is a significant portion of your day that would be taking away from either your free time, your time spent on academics, your social life, that kind of thing. And also consider, what if you have a group meeting for an hour that you have to come to campus for, or you have to meet your supervisor briefly in person. It is a long commute.
Thank you, Andrew. And I know that we're almost out of time. Is it okay if we just take a few
Yeah,
more
sure,
questions?
sure.
Perfect. So questions about the legitimacy of land or of postings like on Facebook. Is there a way that you would recommend to verify if these posts are legit, in addition to, of course, the tips you mentioned in the presentation, and especially for students who cannot get to Canada and view the properties themselves?
So I think you could, first, if there's an address, just maybe Google map it, where you do the street view, and just to make sure that what they're showing matches what Google is showing. But because sometimes what people will say is just put in an address, but then have pictures of something totally different. And so obviously if they don't match, that's not going to be a legitimate posting. I'm trying to think. You could. I'm a big believer in searching up addresses or landlords' names or phone numbers and that kind of thing. So, if let's say the address is 123 Main Street, you could always Google that and see if there are any reviews of the property. Generally, if there have been problems, or of the landlord's name or something like that, often that stuff will be flagged in the news. So I think you can do a little bit of research as well, based on the information that they're sharing. You could request for your landlord to do like a virtual walkthrough, arrange for like a Zoom call or something like that, and say, yeah, I'm interested, but can we do a walkthrough of the property? Most likely the scams are going to be people that don't even own a property at all. So they're just posting random pictures. And so if they can't show you even through a walkthrough of the property, I would say then that's going to be a problem. Yufei, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Uh, Not really, unfortunately. Like the best, of course, is to be here and look at the properties. Like Andrew mentioned in the presentation, some students arrive earlier just and book, to live in a hotel or temporary location to look at housing. And I would say if the landlord's responsive and they can give you kind of live picture of live update of what the housing look like, that would be helpful as well. And your intuition, of course, is also very important. And yeah, and the related question is comparing the platform where you find your housing. So is a posting on the Mcmaster portal more legitimate than Facebook or other websites? Unfortunately, I think in general, it's very, very hard to be completely 100% protected from scams and fraudulent activities. But there are just these kind of general best practices. Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. And again, so to post on Facebook or Kijiji, anybody can do it. To post on the Mcmaster housing board, I believe that there's a fee that they need to pay, that they have to sign in. So there's a little bit more of there's a bit more work that the poster would have to do, whereas on something public and free, anybody can just post anytime.
Thank you, Andrew. And we'll just get to one final question. I know that a few folks still have other questions, and Andrew mentioned in his presentation that international student services are also always available and happy to help you. The email is posted in the chat, is iss@mcmaster.ca. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to email. You may also email myself at zheny37@mcmaster.ca. You if you forget about any information that's shared from this presentation, please feel free to email both International Student Services or myself, whichever that's more convenient for you, and we'll make sure to direct you to the right place. Okay, so our final question is very kind of relevant to a lot of our international students, is about bank accounts. So if a student don't have a Canadian bank account when they arrive, before they arrive, of course, would this be seen as an issue or like a bad thing with a landlord? Would they face additional difficulties?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure if you would face any difficulties, because there's a lot of different ways that you could pay nowadays, right? So, if you're moving in on January 1st and your flight arrives on January 1st and rent is due on January 1st, you could always use a service maybe like PayPal or something like that to at least get that first month's payment in. I mean, I haven't heard in the past of not having a bank being an issue for students. And so because that hasn't come up, I want to say it's probably not going to be a challenge for you.
Thank you, Andrew. And as a renter, I'll share some of my personal experience. When I'm renting, the landlord never really asks if I have a Canadian bank account or anything. All they really care about is I have the money to pay them. So nowadays, I heard that like landlords can accept e-transfers or checks, and of course, cash is always they'll always take cash if in an emergency. Maybe not every month going forward, because that's a lot of cash involved, but like Andrew said, if you're arriving on January 1st and you need to pay on January 2nd, as the first month, the landlord will likely work something out with you. And the most importantly is to talk to the landlord and let them know about your situation. And I'm sure the landlord will be fine as long as the rent is paid one way or another, because landlords, at least in my experience, never asked for my, bank account information or proof of any, having a bank account in general.
Just to add to that, Yufei, just so everybody knows, when you do pay rent, it is really important that your landlord can issue you a receipt, because now that you'll be living in Canada, you'll actually be able to file, or not able to, you'll need to file your taxes, because you'd be considered a resident in Canada during the time you're here. And you can actually use your rental money and use that when you apply for taxes to potentially get some money back. So it is always good for your own safety to have proof that you have paid, because you would never want to just, let's say you just hand over $400 cash and the landlord says, thank you. And then 2 days later, they say, you haven't paid. And you're like, well, I have paid, but there's no receipt, or there's no record of that. So it's always good to have some kind of record. But then going into the future, you can use your rental income to sort of offset taxes. And so I don't want to scare you when I say taxes, because generally as students, you actually get money back when you file taxes in Canada. So don't be like, oh my gosh, I'm coming to Canada, now I have to pay more taxes every year. No, as a student, you're actually probably going to be getting money back. So tax time as a student is actually a very exciting time. And we can help you do that. So no stress about taxes.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. This is a great point. And yeah, don't worry about taxes until April, I believe. And if you're renting in a student house or renting in some with a landlord who's experienced with having students or experience with renting their property, they know that their renters will ask for this rental receipt and they should have it prepared for you by March for the previous year. Okay, thank you, Andrew, for staying with us to answer these questions. And thank you, everyone, for joining us at this session. And I hope that you found everything helpful and best wishes in your housing search journey. Andrew, do you have any last word that you would like to say to our students?
No, just again, thanks for joining. Good luck with your search, and also good luck with your travels to Canada. And we look forward to seeing you when you arrive, whenever that may be.
All right, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.